Hello everybody and welcome to the Carlam Cymru revision sessions. The session this evening will focus on GCSE History, Depression, War and Recovery. It will be presented by Mr Doughton from St Joseph's High School in Newport. The session will last around 45 minutes and during the session, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section. We'll do our best to answer your questions. You'll see there's a hyperlink in the Q&A section. If you're happy to leave your name and email address, we would love to keep in touch with you so we can send you information about future events. You can click on the link at any time during the session. Today's session will be recorded, and the recording and any relevant resources will be uploaded into the e-sgol website under the Carlam Cymru tab. Thank you, Mr Doughton. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr Penny. So today's session, my aim is to get through the first 5 topic areas of content and then all of the 5 exam questions. And obviously this will be uploaded for any other information you need. I will be focusing specifically on depression, war and recovery, but obviously the exam technique for this one will apply the same for the other Unit 1 modules as well. So if we start by looking at key question 1, which looks at the main causes of the depression. So there's 2 main causes: the decline of traditional industries and the impact of the Wall Street crash, which you'll understand if you did last week's session on Unit 2. So by traditional industries, I mean coal mining, ironworks, steelworks, shipbuilding, which areas like South Wales and North East England were heavily reliant on. So these industries went into decline for 3 main reasons. One of these was competition from abroad. So other countries were selling their goods for a lot less than what we were. So then we couldn't compete with that. So for example, the US could produce coal cheaper than us. So other countries would go to the US. For ships, they go to Japan because they were producing these for cheaper than Britain. Also, this meant we found it very difficult to find new markets. Okay, so our government's free trade policy allowed goods from foreign markets to come into Britain freely, which meant the consumers had access to cheaper foreign goods. But then British companies that exported goods often had to pay import duties to foreign governments, making our products more expensive. And finally, traditional industries also in decline because of the obsolete methods, so old-fashioned methods. So where other countries like the US were adopting modern manufacturing techniques, Britain was slow to do this. So we were not invested in up-to-date machinery. So it was a lot more difficult to mine, for example. So that is the one reason why there was a depression in Britain in the 1930s. Another reason was the economic impact of the Wall Street crash. So there's a saying that when America sneezes, the whole world feels it. So after the crash, we felt that massively. Okay, so international trade declined. So because we relied on exports so much, that was difficult for us. So between 1929 and 1931, exports from Britain fell by a half. Unemployment increased rapidly because of the Wall Street crash as well. So in 1930, we had 2 million unemployed, and in 1932, we had 3 million unemployed. So these 2 main reasons meant that Britain fell into depression during the 1930s. So I'm going to take this opportunity now to have a look at the 19-mark question on Unit 1, and that is the how far do you agree with this interpretation question. Okay, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds to have a read through that before I go through the mark scheme and discuss how to approach this question. Right, so this particular question asks, how far do you agree with this interpretation of the cause of the depression in Britain? Okay, so firstly, if we look at the mark scheme, you have 4 marks for showing your detailed knowledge and understanding of the key feature in the question. So in this question, the key feature would be the cause of the depression. So to get those 4 marks, you need to discuss these 3 reasons why there was a decline in traditional industries, you need to discuss the economic impact of the Wall Street crash. Okay, so that's crucial, your own knowledge for picking up those AO1 marks, those 4 marks. And then if you have a look at the AO4 criteria, in order to achieve that band 4, the 12 marks, you need to consider the interpretation in the source. You need to also consider other interpretations on the issue. Okay, then you need to consider the origin or the attribution to think about why that person has reached their interpretation. It's also important that you reach a supported judgment at the end. Okay, so if we go back to that source, you can see it says the cause of the depression was the Wall Street crash. So you would outline the interpretation given in that source. So you would straight away point out that the main interpretation in the source is that the Wall Street crash was the main cause of the depression. That is your first step. Then you consider the content of the source. So what does that source tell us? So you take 2 or 3 things out of that, and then it's important that you support that interpretation with your own knowledge. So you need to use all of your own knowledge to back up the view that the Wall Street crash was the main reason, main cause of the depression in Britain. What is also crucial for AO4 is that you consider the origin of that source. Okay, so use things like who created it, when, why it was created, the nature of that source, what type of source is it, and also the audience. All of these things will help you reach a judgment on why they have reached their interpretation. So this was by a British industrialist, so it's unlikely that he is going to blame the decline of traditional industries for the Wall Street depression. He would rather focus on that Wall Street crash, as if he doesn't want to take responsibility for it. There was nothing he could have done. Also, economic history review, it would have been well researched. Okay, an academic piece of work. Okay, it's also important then that you consider other interpretations. So we've covered the Wall Street crash being the main reason. So then we need to consider what the other reason could be. And it could be the decline of traditional industries. And then you could look at obsolete methods, competition from abroad, and new markets. Okay, then it's important that you answer that question. So how far do you agree with this interpretation? Why? Okay, so this question, often people don't get out of band 2 for AO4 because they either forget to discuss the origin or consider other interpretations. This will stop you at 6 marks on AO4. Okay, so that's question 5. Before I consider question 4, I wanted to look at key question 2. So how were people able to cope with the challenges of the depression years? So we have very different experiences across Britain. Not everyone really struggled. Okay, so you had South Wales Valleys and North East England, which struggled. However, there was a different experience in areas like London and the Midlands because of new light industries, like the car industry. Okay, so one of the crucial ways that those in areas such as South Wales had to try and cope with the depression was the dole. So Unemployment Insurance Act of 1920 provided financial support for up to 39 weeks. Okay, however, in 1931, they introduced the means test, where they checked whether you were entitled to this. So inspectors would come to your home to see if you were deserving of that money, which was very unpopular. People were embarrassed about people going through their things. People also fell out because they had to throw out relatives in case they lost some more money. Okay. Another way that people coped during depression was making ends meet. Okay. People were struggling to make ends meet. They didn't have enough to go around. So they had to buy things like cheaper food, like potatoes, bread, to make sure they could feed their family. Women often took the brunt of this. because they'd make sure that their children and husbands were fed before they were. Communities also came together to help each other. This is known as self-help. So credit mechanisms would be set up. So if one week one family was struggling to pay their rent, they would come together and support them. Okay. There was also the Special Areas Act, and these were 4 special areas identified by the government that tried to convince companies, these new light industries, to go to areas like South Wales. Okay, you'd be given a grant of £2 million if they would relocate to areas like this. In 1936, they extended it by offering incentives like lower rent, tax reductions. Okay, one local example is Treforest Industrial Estate, which did that. People also went on hunger marches. So one of the worst hit areas was Jarrow in northeast England, and they marched to London to take a petition to Parliament. Rhondda also struggled and took part in a hunger march. One of the other ways that people coped was by leaving Wales. So in the 1930s and 40s, around 430,000 people left Wales, okay, to go to the more affluent areas of England and maybe even abroad as well. Okay. Another way that people cope was, like on the America course, we've got radio, cinema, and sport as a form of escapism. Okay, Tommy Farr was a famous boxer from the Rhondda. People use this to try and escape their everyday lives. But like I mentioned at the start of this slide, there's a great variation in the quality of life in 1930s Britain. So some suggest that there's 2 Britons during this time. The old, like the areas of South Wales that really struggled, and then the new, like the Midlands and London. So these new areas are investment, housing, new roads, rail links. However, some areas really struggle to escape poverty, like South Wales. But then you've got some more experiences in Wales as well. Not all areas struggled. You had a more prosperous middle class emerging in parts of Cardiff, like Kincoed. However, Rumney, Merthyr and areas like that struggled massively with unemployment. So now I'm going to use that to consider question 4. So question 4 will give you 4 main features from the same topic area, and you will have to make connections between these. You choose 3, and it's important that you don't get bogged down in just talking about your own knowledge, okay? Because that is only worth 2 marks here. If you are fully explaining and making these connections explicit, your own knowledge will come through anyway. Okay, so if you have a look on the right, assessment objective 1, 2 marks for detailed knowledge and understanding. But what's more important is AO2. That's 10 marks. So you need to fully explain the connections between your chosen features. Okay, so it's important that you start by giving an overview of your chosen features. So why are they connected? So I've chosen hunger marches, making ends meet, and means test. I've written them down there. And I said the 3 features are connected because, well, they're all aspects of life during depression. Okay, so that's my clear connection straight away. Then it's important that you make detailed connections between each of them. So then I could go to hunger marches to make an ends meet, and I could say hunger marches and making ends meet are connected because people were struggling to make ends meet. One of the ways they tried to cope was going on hunger marches to try and improve their situation. My next step then, hunger marches and the means test. I try and connect those. So the hunger marches and the means test are connected because one of the reasons people went on the Jarrow hunger march and the Rhondda hunger march was in reaction to their dislike of the means test. And then you can see my arrows there, that I would then have to do hunger marches to the means test. Okay, and then I would make a clear connection between the means test and making ends meet. So they're connected because due to people losing money because of the means test, they struggle to make ends meet and had to make do with what they had. and then you could summarize the main connections that you've made throughout your answer. Okay, so obviously this is a question that you can plan for, because they are going to give you four key features from any of the topic areas, any of the 7 topic areas that we cover. So before I look at question 3, I want to look at key question 3, so the content. So how effectively did Britain prepare for war? So we know that there was a massive threat from Germany. When Hitler became Chancellor in 1933, he promised to ignore the terms of the Treaty of Versailles and make Germany strong. And one of the ways he did this was rearmament. He also went on to remilitarize the Rhineland, so a piece of land near France that was demilitarized in the Treaty of Versailles. However, we know that Britain and France did nothing because they were following a policy of appeasement. They wanted to avoid war at all costs. In March 1938 was the Anschluss with Austria. So Austria was made a part of Germany. But again, nothing was done about this because of their Chamberlain's policy of appeasement. So due to this, it gave Hitler more confidence. He's building up his army, he's remilitarizing the Rhineland, and he's getting away with it. So he turned his attention then to Czechoslovakia. So there were 3 million German speakers in the Sudetenland, and he wanted them to unite with Germany. So at the Munich conference, Neville Chamberlain agreed that Hitler could take this part of Czechoslovakia. However, he could not make any more demands. But as we know, Hitler ignored this and went on to occupy the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay, and after Hitler agreed to split Poland with the Soviet Union, Britain backed Poland, and that is why we ended up at war in September 1939 with Germany. Okay, there I've got those key details about that policy of appeasement that comes throughout the threat from Germany. So Hitler ignores the Treaty of Versailles. Britain does nothing because they're following a policy of appeasement. Okay, in the hope that war could be avoided. After the Munich conference, he thought that maybe this would achieve peace, but we know it didn't. And actually, this allowed Germany to get stronger. Okay, Britain also started to prepare for war, especially when they realized that appeasement had failed. So radar was used to pick up the Luftwaffe, anti-aircraft guns, barrage balloons. So air raid shelters were also provided. So Anderson and Morrison shelters were provided for British people in areas like London. If they didn't get them, they'd use the London Underground. Okay, in April 1939, before war had broken out, the Military Training Act made it compulsory for men aged between 20 and 22 to join the armed forces. In September 1939, then, the National Service Act made it compulsory for men aged between 18 and 41 to join. So that's where I want to look at the significance question. So this question was on the 2019 paper, and I know a lot of my students didn't like this one. So it's important that we prepare for what we'd see as the worst option. So why was the German invasion of Czechoslovakia in March 1939 significant to Britain? So because there's 4 marks for own knowledge, it's important that you start with an introduction paragraph where you pick up those 4 marks. So talk about the German invasion of Czechoslovakia, okay, and how he took the Sudetenland and how there was the Munich conference, but he ignored the terms of that and went on to take the rest of Czechoslovakia anyway. Okay, then for AO2, you need to give clear explanations why that was significant. So aim for 3 to 4 explained reasons why that key feature was significant. So on the next page there, I've given an example. So obviously step 1, like I mentioned, was a detailed knowledge paragraph about the key feature, and then give 3 to 4 explained reasons. Okay, I tell my classes use point, example, explain. Okay, so there's my example point there. Now, this would be 1 point. I would expect my students to make at least 3, if not 4. So one reason why the German invasion of Czechoslovakia was significant was because it made Britain realise that Hitler could not be appeased. The policy of appeasement had failed. This is significant because it meant Britain put more effort into preparing for war. It's also significant because it made Britain realise war was now inevitable. Okay, so you would then go on to give 2 to 3 more explained reasons why the German invasion of Czechoslovakia was significant. And it's important that you don't just tell a story. That will get you your AO1 marks, but you need to explain. That word because is key for you to get into the AO2 marks. Okay? So, before I look at question 2, the content for question 4 focuses on how people in Britain cope with the experience of war. Okay, so this focuses on bombing of British cities, rationing, evacuation, and the contribution of women. So the Luftwaffe began its bombing campaign on British cities in the autumn of 1940. Okay, in London, which was particularly badly hit, it was bombed every night from the 2nd of September to the 2nd of November. Over 15,000 people were killed, and these raids continued until 1941. They restarted again then in 1944. So like I said, we've got Morrison and Anderson shelters provided for some, not everyone. So a lot of people in London took shelter in the underground. Okay, this did lead to a boost of morale, a spirit of wartime friendship and cooperation was created. Another area, and a good Welsh reference, was Swansea. Okay, it was bombed for 3 nights during the 3-night blitz between 19th and 21st of February 1941. So the port, the docks, and oil refinery were targeted, and during that, 230 people were killed and 397 injured. There's also other cities you could give examples for. You've got Cardiff, Coventry, Birmingham. Okay, so these big cities were targeted, but these are considered key details. So it's important for assessment objective 1 that you get these in there. Okay. Also, rationing was crucial during the war. Okay. Things like food, clothing, petrol were all rationed. Okay. So Britain was importing almost 40% of its food from abroad. So it was crucial that it was rationed to make sure there was enough to last them. The German U-boat attacks in March 1942, the Germans sank 275 ships. So everyone would be issued with a ration book and coupons for things like meat, eggs, butter, and sugar. Another important aspect of coping with war was evacuation. So obviously you move children out of the cities into the countryside, okay, where they could avoid the Luftwaffe bombings. Okay, so not just children, you might have pregnant women, people with disabilities, and also some teachers were evacuated as well. They would be given host families when they got there, and it was two very different experiences. Some people were treated really badly and hated their experience and couldn't wait to go home. Some were used as unpaid workers and didn't have any support from the families they were put with because they were just seen as an extra burden. However, others were treated as part of the family and they really enjoyed being with their host families. And finally, you've got women contributing both at home and on the war front. So by 1943, 57% of workers were women. They played vital roles within the armed services, munitions factories, and in the land army. From December 1941, women aged 19 to 30 were conscripted to work, and by 1943, 17 million women were either in the forces or engaged in war work. So government propaganda urged women to aid the war effort. So these 4 areas are the things you need to focus on when thinking about how Britain coped with the experiences of war. Now, this question 2, is only a 6-marker, but is quite challenging because there are different things you need to consider. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to read through that source before we have a think about it. So for question 2, you'll always be given something, a source that could be debated. So it's not going to be completely accurate or completely inaccurate. There'll be things you can say are accurate about the source and some things you'll say are inaccurate. So the source says, the legend of British self-control and calm under fire is being destroyed. All reports from London agree that people are seized by fear. The 7 million Londoners run about the streets not knowing what to do and are victims of bombs and bursting shells. So that's a report on a German radio station broadcast in both Germany and Britain on the 18th of September 1940. So before we think about what we need to consider when discussing the accuracy of that source, I want to look at the mark scheme. So you've got assessment objective 1 for own knowledge is worth 2 marks. So you need to cover some detailed own knowledge about that topic on the effect of the Blitz on the people of Britain. Then for AO3, it says analyse and evaluate the accuracy of the source set within the context of the historical events studied. The strengths and the limitations of the source material are fully addressed and a substantiated judgment is reached. It's important when considering this source that we don't just discuss the content, our own knowledge. It's important that you consider the origin or the attribution. Okay, so who made it, when, why, who was the audience of the source. Okay, so this source asks, to what extent does this source accurately explain the effect of the Blitz on the people of Britain? So you should start by discussing the content of the source. Give me some key points about what that source tells us. Knowledge. Use your own knowledge to test the accuracy of that source. So you might be able to give some reasons why it's accurate, in that London was bombed continuously for months. Okay. However, it says that 7 million Londoners run about the streets not knowing what to do. Well, actually, that's inaccurate because some had Morrison shelters, some had Anderson shelters, some went to the London Underground. Okay, so that's important to use that own knowledge to test the accuracy of that. That's how we know if something's right or wrong. It's from our own knowledge. Step 3, then, you use that origin. You consider the strengths and limitations of the source. So who made it? Well, a German radio station. Okay, they're obviously going to try and hit the confidence, hit the morale of the British people while boosting the morale of Germany. Okay, think about when it was made. Why would they be doing this? Okay, what type of source is it? Who is it aimed at? Well, obviously, it was broadcast in both Germany and Britain. So it was aimed at the Germans and the British. Does that limit the accuracy of the source? So these things, you need to consider the strengths and limitations, but also consider how that impacts the accuracy of that source. And the mark scheme does say that you should reach a judgment on the accuracy of the source. So you will sum up your argument. The question was, to what extent does this source accurately explain the effect of the Blitz on the people of Britain? Well, you address that. You give an answer to that question. The question asks about the effect of the Blitz on the people of Britain. That source is only talking about London. Doesn't mention the experiences of those in Cardiff or Swansea. Okay, so before I go through the content for the next topic area, I just want to look at question 1 to make sure I have time to get through it. And for question 1, there is no own knowledge needed whatsoever. Okay, so it's important that you do not waste time on this question and you pick up your 4 marks by doing exactly what the mark scheme asks you to do. So I'm going to give you 1 minute, because there's 2 sources, to have a read through source A and to have a look at source B. So these sources are about the Jarrow Crusade, so life during the Depression. And what you need to make sure you do is give 2 things that can be learned about each source. Okay, so from source A, what 2 things can we learn about the Jarrow Crusade? So from source A, we can learn that during the Jarrow Crusade, a petition was given to the government. You could also pick up another point. What's important is that you give a balanced response. So you give 2 points for each source. What then can we learn from source B about the Jarrow Crusade? Well, from source B, we can learn that during the Jarrow Crusade, they marched in all kinds of weather, such as rain. From source B, we can also learn that they were escorted by the police. Now, it's important that it's something you could see in there. So you couldn't get a mark for giving the number of men who marched, because then that is not something you can actually learn from that source. Okay, we can learn that the Jarrow Crusade took place in 1936 because that's written in the attribution. Okay, so for this question, it's important you say 2 things that you can learn from each source. Okay, I'll give you another example for this one about the coming of war. So I'll give you 30 seconds to have a look at these. So again, you take 2 things we can learn from each source about this topic. So we ask what can be learned from sources A and B about the British government's preparation for war. So we would say 2 things we can learn from source A. So from source A, we can learn that children were going to be evacuated from towns and cities. From source A, we can also learn that the evacuation was voluntary. Let's look at source B. From source B, we can learn that Anderson shelters were given to the people by the British government. From source B, we can also learn that the family would put these together in the garden. Okay, so it's important that you take 2 things from each source and provide a balanced response, and don't waste any time going through your own knowledge. So we just got 5 minutes, so I'll use this time now to go through key question 5 on the importance of building morale during the war. So obviously radio and cinema, like it was during the Depression, was crucial for keeping up morale and as a form of escapism. Okay, radio would be used to give out important messages. They would also have programs to take your mind off what was happening. So like It's That Man Again, and music while you work to keep boost morale while people were in the factories contributing to the war effort. They also used cinema to promote the war effort. Okay, he was always focused on the positives. So the most popular films at the time were Went the Day Well and The Day Will Dawn. So these type of films would show Britain winning the war and defeating the Germans. Propaganda was also crucial during the war. Okay, information of often a biased nature that would promote a certain perspective. So it would make sure that anyone, men, women, children, did their part to promote the war effort and contribute positively to that war. So this propaganda was also crucial when thinking about those key campaigns, like the Dig for Victory and the Spitfire Fund. Censorship was also important. So certain letters or certain information would be censored if it didn't show Britain in a positive light. So the Dunkirk evacuation, a lot of the information there would have been censored just to show any positives. So that was spun as a success. Winston Churchill's speeches would be crucial. Okay, Neville Chamberlain looked weak through his policy of appeasement, whereas Churchill spoke out against appeasement throughout the time period. Okay, stirring speeches in anywhere that was bombed. Okay, he'd go to those places to make sure people still had morale, people still wanted to win this war. Okay, he also had very good relations with President Roosevelt. Okay, and the American contribution to the war was crucial in winning it. Okay, so that is the key information for topic area 5. Hopefully that has been some help for key content and key skills. I'm not sure if there's any questions, Mr. Penny.
No, nothing from us. No.
Brilliant. Thank you, sir.